Hi, this is another episode of Inside the Sherman Playhouse, and I'm Steve Stott, and today I am talking to Dan Friedman, who is our current director, directing The Underpants, which is opening in a couple of weeks. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Steve.
Dan, when I was looking at your bio and your experience, I was thinking, where on earth am I going to start talking to you about you? Because you seem to have a vast array of things going on within the arts and a vast amount of experience. Can you give me a bit of an idea, first of all, of how you got into the arts and into the performing arts?
Sure. Well, sure. I mean, if you really want to go really far back, when I was a kid, I went to see, I believe it was Once Upon a Mattress, Once Upon a Mattress?
Yeah.
And my uncle, who was not very much older than it was his high school show. And I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and I'd never seen anything like that done on a non-professional level. I had been to Broadway shows with my parents and my grandparents, but I had never seen an amateur production that was done really, really well. And he had a fairly decent part. He was not a singer or a performer, but he was doing it just for the fun of doing it. And I thought, wow, that I could do that. And so it was an interest of mine. Then, so I started not really pursuing it as a young kid, but I got a couple of roles. I was in The Music Man because I was missing my 2 front teeth, and I lisped. So it was sort of one of those, I fell into that. And then when I got to high school, I joined the drama club, and I was doing all of that. And then after that, I really kind of just sort of gave it up. I wasn't really supremely interested in the performing end of it. I was much more interested in the backstage and the production end of it. And I had to take, I was a creative writing double major in college. Creative writing was one of my majors. And part of that was a playwriting class. And I had never written a play in my life, but I thought, I've seen a lot of plays, I've read a lot of plays, maybe I can do this. And it was sort of one of those courses where all you have to do is complete the assignment and you pass. They weren't looking for you to be Tennessee Williams or anybody like that. And I thought, okay, well, I can give this a shot. And so I did that for a couple of semesters. And I ended up, completely unbeknownst to me, I didn't even know it existed, they had an annual award for the playwriting role, the best playwriting prize, whatever it was, that they had endowed annually, and I won it. And so it got listed in my graduation program, and I didn't even know it until I read the program. And my parents showed up and said, "You won this award?" I said, "Yeah, how about that?" I didn't even know. But the woman who taught the course was an excellent instructor, and so it kind of, I thought, well, geez, maybe I can do something like this a little bit. And so I got very involved in doing that for a while. But when I graduated from college, I sort of was doing it on the side, and I would enter a couple of festivals, and occasionally I'd get a prize here or there. But about, I guess it's almost close to 20 years ago now, when I moved, I was living in Florida, and I moved back up north, and a friend of mine was directing a play, an Agatha Christie play, and he needed someone to play the cop because he didn't have anybody, and it was 7 or 8 lines. He said, "Do you want to do it?" And I said, "Oh, sure, I can do this." And then I sort of, little by little, got more involved. Well, hey, since you did that, would you be interested in doing this? Yeah, okay, I can do that. And then, it became more of a thing, and I just had the very good fortune of making a lot of friends in the local community theater community in Darien and Westport and a bunch of other places. Right. And I lived in Westchester at the time, and it was fun. It was something to do. My son was young. It was a way to keep busy, and it was a hobby more than anything else. And as he got older and he started becoming a little more interested in it, I started getting more involved. And people would say, "Could you join the board, or would you be an advisory counselor to us?" And so that's kind of how I ended up where I am now. And I try to do at least one show a year if I can. If not, maybe I alternate. But it's now for me more of a there's material out there that I love, like this play. And I look for opportunities to do those kinds of things. I have a bucket list of plays I'd like to do, and it's finding the right place and the right opportunity. And when we finally moved where I live now in Carmel, a very good friend of mine who had lived in Carmel and had just moved had done a lot of shows here in Sherman. My friend Bruce Thompson.
Oh, we know Bruce. We know Bruce very well.
And Bruce is a great guy, and Bruce and I worked together for a couple of years. And he said, "Hey, you should check out Sherman Playhouse, and it's always been in the back of my mind. And I follow you guys on Facebook and all that. I never really got the opportunity until Robin had said, "Hey, we're taking calls for shows," and I pitched this one. And I'm really happy to finally have the opportunity to do it because it's long been one of my favorites.
Yeah, well, we're obviously very happy that you've landed here, and we find that a lot of people land here because they know people who've been involved and are very supportive. So it always helps. Coming back to the playwriting side of things, do you still write at all? Or
I do. I still do. I do mostly. It's hard. It's become hard. Only in the sense of just having the free time to do it. But I had done most of my success that I've had with it in the festival circuit or in competitions with one acts.
Yes.
And I have a bunch of them that I've written that have been performed. One has been actually performed fairly widespread in various festivals around the country, and another that's done okay. And it's finding venues for that format has become very, very difficult. And I'm on, I'm a member of several groups that promotes and opportunities for playwrights and where to submit. And it seems that most of what people are looking for are either full-length plays, which I have a couple of, or very short plays, like 10-minute one acts.
Right, so there are more scenes than plays.
So I don't really have those. Mine tend to run between 25 minutes to 40 minutes. Right. And there are some places out there that I've had luck with, but it's funny that they don't look for pieces of that length so much, and I'm sure there are various reasons for that. So when I do come across one that says they're looking for 30-minute one acts, oh, hey, I got something for you. And I'm always, I still keep a journal. It was a habit I started when I was in college as part of the playwriting class. She encouraged us to keep journals, to jot down ideas whenever we had them, and I still carry it with me. I don't write in it anywhere near as often as I used to, but every now and then I'll hear something on the radio or someone will say something to me, and I'll think, oh, that was interesting, and I'll jot it down. You never know; you may use it years later, but it's there if I need it.
I mean, do you find that in your writing, you're writing from ideas that come in from the outside, or do you write anything that's I won't say autobiographical, but it's based on more on your experiences?
No. I really like. In fact, actually, it's funny because I just realized that The Underpants is a play like this. I like when perfectly ordinary circumstances are disturbed by one unusual moment. So one piece that I've written is about a guy. This one is actually based on someone I knew in high school who is an Elvis impersonator. And it's what I imagined what happened to him after high school. So it's just sort of that was one, and then and the fact is he just happens to be an Elvis impersonator. And then there's another one. The one that I have that's done fairly well was sort of historical based because I am also a very huge movie buff, and I love movies and I love talking about movies and going to the movies and the history of it, especially. I like the classics. And so I've naturally just read a lot about movie history and directors and producers and actors that I like. And so I've read a lot about, for example, the Hollywood Blacklist. And so I wrote one that is set during the Blacklist, which is completely in the background. It has really nothing to do with the story itself other than it's the setting for these two guys, one of whom is being blacklisted and his friend who feels put out because he's not been blacklisted. Like he's not famous enough to even be bothered to be blacklisted. And so it was just sort of some stuff like that, because that's just crazy. Nobody would want to be blacklisted, but this guy does because he takes it personally. And in this show, it's a fairly, standard bourgeois middle-class setting except for one thing, and then that sets off all the other things that happen. So the little twist things are the things that I like. Yeah,
and I know from talking to you on other things that you're a great fan of comedy.
Yeah,
and I know you mentioned that your first album that you ever bought was
Steve Martin. Let's Get Small.
Steve Martin, and which seems a bit of an odd choice for a 7-year-old.
Well, I had the very I guess it depends on who you ask. I had two uncles who I was very close to. Still am close. One of them is now deceased. My mother's younger brothers, one of whom, as I said, is only a few years older than me, and so I got a lot of pop culture influences from him. He was in college while I was in junior high, so I started listening to college radio, and he would introduce me to bands that I probably would have listened to a few years later, but I started listening to them early. And he would take me to the movies, and that's where I would see things like The Jerk and whatever, when I was probably way too young to see. And my other uncle was a little older, and he was the one who taught me about the classics. And when we got our first VCR, the old top-loading VCRs, when we got our first VCR, and I think this was before he was married, he came and stayed with us, and it was wintertime. And he came out to stay with us for about a week, and he came with a stack of videotapes, just come out, brand new. VCRs have been around for like a day and a half, and he had a whole stack of classic movies. And we watched, the first one that he pulled out was, you remember Gunga Din with Cary Grant?
Yes.
And so he said, all right, sit down, we're going to watch this. And he puts it in the VCR, he turns it on, and I said, okay. And my sister, who was even younger than me, was at the time probably 5 or 6 years old, saw black and white. See you later. I'm out of here. And so she left, and I stayed. And I thought, and he would talk me through it. And he'd say, all right, now you see this guy. This guy's name is Cary Grant, and this is what he does. And watch what he's going to do in this scene. And now watch what happens here. And he sort of like, as I'm watching it, he kind of walked me through it.
It was a DVD commentary.
It was like DVD commentary. Yeah. And so I thought, oh, okay, this is actually, because I probably would have done the same thing. Oh, black and white? I'm not interested in black and white. Just because it's, I grew up with a Zenith, and we have color TV, and what do I need black and white for? And so that's sort of, where I went to the dark side. And so I started really devouring classic films, and there was a video store, one of the old mom and pop video stores, that was on my way home from school. And the woman there, this is way pre-Blockbuster and all that, and the woman who ran it used to say to me, if you bring me a cup of coffee from the 7-Eleven on your way home from school, I'll give you a free rental for the night. So I would stop in there every day and hand her a coffee, get a videotape, and swap it the next day. So I watched more stuff in high school. I just, I didn't sleep. I'd get my homework done, and then I'd watch a movie. Yeah. And so I've seen a lot of stuff, and I'm cursed with that, useless fountain of useless information stuff. So people will say, hey, what year was this? And I'll rattle it off and think, God, I have no life.
Well, that's a useful, having no life is a useful thing in community theatre anyway.
Yes, indeed.
But having that set of knowledge to draw on,
sure,
especially when you're being creative, it's got to be useful.
It is useful. What I'm always wary of is I don't want to just mimic something.
No.
And so I'll say to someone in the cast, hey, do you remember this and how that character behaved? Well, I don't want you to do that exactly, but think about why he was acting that way. Yes. And see if we can sort of get you to a similar place. But I don't want you to just do a straight out flat imitation. That's not the point. So it is helpful. It is helpful. Yeah. And my son has gotten into it. When my son was little, we used to show them, and my daughter now too, is I used to show him all the classic silent comedies, because what the heck, a guy falling down and getting hit in the face with a pie is going to be funny no matter what. And he would go to school the next day or on Monday, and the teacher would say, all right, what did you guys do over the weekend? And he would say, well, I watched this Marx Brothers movie called Duck Soup. And the other kids look at him like they have no idea what he's talking about. So I sort of cursed him that way, too, because he would come home and say, they just don't know what I'm talking about. I'm like, I'm sorry. I said, we don't have to watch it.
It sounds like the kind of story you hear from Spielberg or whatever.
Yeah, I guess so.
How they grow up and
I
get
guess
into all that kind of...
Yeah, and so now he's starting to get into film and video production and whatnot. So it's interesting. So I said, well, now you have a lot of reference points for a kid your age, completely by accident.
Excellent.
Sort of.
Excellent. It brings us quite nicely on to talking about the Underpants. Mm-hmm. Obviously, your first album was Steve Martin. Yeah. Steve Martin adapted this particular play from, remind me, it's called Die Hose. It's the original German play by Karl Sternheim. You're right. And it's from 1911, I believe the original play was written. And Sternheim was actually what I know of him is a very interesting character. He was, for his day, considered to be very risque. Mm-hmm. And I know that, we read it now, and it's
what's the big deal?
Fairly tame, yeah.
But he was considered to be a very much like Steve Martin, kind of a lot of irony and a lot of commentary about public and social mores and whatnot. To the point where he ended up getting banned by the Nazis when they took over, and I think he died.
Which is no bad thing to be banned by the Nazis.
No, it's not. I actually would take that as a pride, point of pride. Yeah. But he ended up dying during the war in exile. Die Hose was I think his very first play. So it was the one that kicked off his career, and he wrote many others after that with the same sort of satirical bent. And so it's very easy to see how someone like Steve Martin would latch onto this. But it's so, that's sort of what appeals to me, is that if you said to me, well, hey, would you be interested in this adaptation of a 1911 German comedy about society? And would you be interested if I told you it was adapted by Steve Martin? Oh, really? Okay, let's see what that's about.
Yeah, and again, it fits in with your own interest in taking that one event. Turns a seemingly normal situation on its head, which this does, without giving too much away. It's all about a reveal of underwear or not underwear at a particular time, and the events on a fairly straight-laced.
And you notice, that in addition to that, aside from it snowballing from that one moment, you have other elements and characters that come in that don't necessarily know what's happening, and then the humor there is, how does it get introduced to them, and how long do they remain oblivious,
and how does that impact them?
How does it impact them?
Absolutely, and I think that's what appeals to me about the play is the fact that it builds in a very almost conventional farce way.
Yeah, it does.
It's a series of not so much misunderstandings, but events building on events building on events.
Right. It's not so much that we know full well, the audience knows full well what everybody's motives are. It's just a question of when do the characters themselves figure that out, and when they do figure it out, what do they do about it?
Yes.
Or do they figure it out? So that's what I like about it. And if I've come to appreciate, I used to listen to the comedy albums, the Steve Martin albums, and I love the movies. And then when he started getting, I guess, it must be the late 80s or so, when he started moving away from that. He really does not do stand-up anymore, hasn't done it for years. And he started moving away from sort of the slapstick stuff into much more intellectual material. It was that, I took notice of that. I remember thinking, oh, wow, that's interesting that he would... he's a literate guy. He's very well read.
Yes.
He has a lot. He has the banjo albums and the bluegrass, and he does a lot of stuff. And I've read a couple of his novels and whatnot. And it's fascinating to me that he's thinking. You can almost see the thought pattern where he's kind of going slightly in this direction, and where's that going to take him from? As opposed to the arrow through the head and the balloon animals and the ridiculously silly stuff, which I loved,
which he's done very well. But there's a certain lifespan for that kind of thing.
He's carved out a very interesting. I think when you look back, years from now at everything he's done, I think he's carved out a very, very interesting career path.
Yes,
and the screenplays, especially, he didn't direct the films, but especially a film like Roxanne, which is Cyrano de Bergerac.
Yes.
That was the first time. So now that, I remember I knew of Cyrano de Bergerac. I don't think I had ever read it, but I saw the film, and then I went, geez, I should probably go read Cyrano.
Yes.
And so it was fascinating to me to see how he took that story, having gone back and read it afterwards, to see how he took that play and then transformed it into the film. Oh, here's the moment where this happens in the play. It wasn't, obviously it's not a straight, it's an updated version.
It's an adaptation.
Right. Yes. But the fact that you could follow it, you could follow the path. And I said, oh, okay, so he must have been thinking about it way earlier than when he actually did it.
Yes.
Because that can't be easy.
Yes.
And so I've done part of my writing courses. There was a section about adaptations. And they're hard.
Yes.
They're very hard to do. It was a challenge. I don't think I've ever done one since the course, where you had to work with material that was public domain. obviously for legal reasons, but also because it was just easier to get your hands on it. Yes. And so they gave us in the class, everybody got an O. Henry story that literally randomly, they just shuffled the deck, said, okay, you take this one, you take this one, you take this one. And some of his work has been turned into films and plays and whatnot. I got one that I had never heard of, and until I read it, it could have been by anybody really. And so I thought, okay, let me try to do as he did. I'm going to update it to a modern setting, and I'm going to add this little twist to it. So it went from being this story of a businessman whose son is this, sort of a do-nothing, and how am I going to get my son married, and who's going to want to marry him? He's such a lightweight intellectual, and so on and so forth, and all he cares about is money. And I thought, oh, okay, well, let's see, what would, not necessarily Steve Martin, but what would make it interesting in that context? So I made it about the guy was in the mob, and he wanted his son to take over them, but his son was a lightweight, so what's he going to do? And so I kind of thought, well, that's at least different. I mean, that which I thought was the purpose of the class.
Yes.
Was to take it and twist it around a little bit.
You don't really want to take the same story today.
Which some people did, so I was I've been very lucky. I've met a lot of very, very interesting people in various capacities. And I like to think that all of them have had some sort of impact on what I do and how I approach certain things. So, there's a lot of very talented people out there in the community theater world.
Yes.
And so, half of my philosophy is cast it well and get out of the way.
Yes.
And so I think we're very lucky. We have a great cast, and they are working really, really hard to make it funny.
Yes, and I've seen some of the rehearsals, and I absolutely agree. There's some moments which are, laugh out loud, funny, and there's lots of clever dialogue. If you've never seen a Steve Martin adaptation of a play, this is a good place to start. It's a farce in the true sense of the word, trousers down from time to time, but that's not what it's all about. Lots of fun dialogue to follow, and as you can see, a great and colourful set, which is where we're sitting now. So that's all we've got time for.
Great.
So thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you, Steve.
And look forward to seeing the play.
Indeed.
On the 21st of September is when we open.
See you then.
At the Sherman Playhouse. See you then. Bye-bye now.